World of Warfare presents the Battle of Rostov. In the summer of 1942, Nazi war leaders gathered at their village headquarters west of the Don River in the Soviet Union, studying maps of their front lines that had nearly collapsed during their winter retreat from Moscow. Now that their front had stabilized, Adolf Hitler had ordered his troops to retake the initiative under Germany's Case Blue summer offensive, with an emphasis on retaking what German war leaders called the gateway to the Caucasus, the city of Rostov-on-Don. For it was there in 1941 where the Germans had been forced to abandon the captured city in their first major retreat of the war. Hitler's orders for Case Blue were simple and clear: retake Rostov and don't give it up again. Yet what no one in the Nazis' war room would have guessed as they planned their offensive on Rostov was Hitler's yet conceived critical decision-making error that would cost the Nazis everything on the Eastern Front. During the Germans' first attempt to take Rostov in late 1941, after their spectacular encirclements at Kyiv and their advance across the steppe, the 1st Panzer Army under Field Marshal Ewald von Kleist had driven on Rostov in November, where he took the city on the 21st before the Soviets counterattacked days later from the north and east, when the Soviets' 37th Army hit the Germans' exposed flanks and threatened to cut off Kleist's spearheads. Under pressure of total defeat, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt had ordered a retreat to the Mios River line, which prompted an enraged Hitler to sack him temporarily after von Rundstedt became the first German field marshal who refused to hold territory at all costs. Yet by the time of Germany's Case Blue offensive in the spring of 1942, the Eastern Front had changed dramatically after the Germans' failed drive on Moscow had left German infantry divisions under strength and lacking in morale. Panzer losses had been heavy, with fuel shortages crippling Hitler's ability to conduct mechanized warfare, leading the Führer to approve a plan that was ambitious even by Barbarossa standards. In the first phase of his attack plan, Army Group South would smash Soviet defenses around Kharkov and Voronezh, followed by a second phase push to the Don and Volga rivers. The final phase, lastly, would drive south into the Caucasus to seize the oil fields at Maikop, Grozny, and Baku. Hitler's plan hinged on the city of Rostov, which controlled the main rail and road crossings over the Don River into the Caucasus. And after Case Blue opened on June 28 of 1942, the Germans' 4th Panzer Army and 2nd Army drove through thin Soviet defenses around Voronezh, while farther south, the 6th Army battered understrength and poorly coordinated Soviet formations around Kharkov before driving toward the Volga. At the Blau 3 German offensive at Rostov, the 1st Panzer Army again played the point role, with the 17th Army on the right and the 4th Romanian Army on the left, with orders to break through the lower Don, capture Rostov, and then fan out into the Caucasus. Worn down by continuous fighting, Soviet commanders faced a grim choice: stand and risk encirclement or surrender key territory in a hastily conducted retreat, including the vital transportation hub of Rostov. In the end, the Soviets chose to trade space for time, but time was exactly what the Germans were trying to deny them, since in truth, the approaches to Rostov proved to be unforgiving country for an army on the run. To the west lay the Mios River, with its low ridges and deep gullies. Beyond the Mios lay the open steppe, which was dusty and sweltering in the summer heat, terrain which ultimately rewarded speed and punished hesitation. For the Germans in pursuit, the long reach of their panzer columns and integrated air support thrived in such conditions, so long as their fuel and maintenance held out. By mid-July, Kleist's 1st Panzer Army had already driven more than 250 miles from their initial starting point, with German spearheads now aiming straight for Rostov, while from the west, the German 17th Army closed in on a narrower front, which in theory would join up with Kleist's panzers at Rostov to trap the Soviet 56th Army against the Don River. As the Battle of Rostov opened on July 19th, German formations raced in to seal a pocket, while the Soviets raced to escape it. In conditions of dry, hot weather, the Luftwaffe's Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers wreaked havoc on Soviet columns who escaped over Don crossings before attempting to blow bridges and dikes to slow their attackers. To counter the Soviets' efforts at a scorched earth retreat, the Germans employed a special forces unit known as the Brandenburg Regiment, specially trained in infiltration and demolition, where in the early hours of the assault, the units crossed the Don River in rubber boats before slipping through Soviet positions and attacking key points such as the Bataisk Bridge and the dikes to the south of the city. After fierce close-range fighting, the Brandenburg Regiment successfully seized each crossing before Soviet engineers could complete their demolitions or open floodgates to slow the Germans' advance. With the Don crossings intact and secured, Kleist soon saw his tanks and motorized infantry cross the river far faster than the Soviets had anticipated. Already in full retreat, the Soviet 56th Army suddenly found German units attacking on its flanks and rear, threatening to turn an orderly pullback into an all-out rout. Inside Rostov itself, the situation for civilians deteriorated rapidly in a nightmarish déjà vu, which saw an already badly damaged city crushed by the Germans' return, as well as their own Soviet authorities who hurried to evacuate factories and destroy anything useful to the enemy they could not move. German soldiers marching through the city saw wrecked streets, burned warehouses, smashed tram lines, and abandoned equipment. For Rostov civilians, German occupation returned with all its fears of repression, shortages, forced labor, and uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring. Refugees clogged streets, turning Rostov into a choke point as soldiers of the 56th fled the city. German artillery pounded key junctions and railheads, while Stukas hit barge crossings and ferry slips along the Don. German advance guards probed into the city, testing resistance and marking Soviet firing points for destruction. On July 23rd, after 5 days of fighting and pursuit, the first German units began to enter Rostov in strength, this time without a powerful Soviet counteroffensive to contend with. After Rostov officially fell into German control on July 24th, German troops felt a certain vindication after their 1941 retreat from the city, while Hitler himself felt that the fall of Rostov was confirmation that his grand design on the Eastern Front was working. In response, he issued Führer Directive No. 45, which effectively split his Army Group South into 2 units, ordering Army Group A under Field Marshal Wilhelm List to drive through Rostov into the Caucasus, while Army Group B under Maximilian von Weichs was ordered to push along the Don toward the Volga before seizing the vital city of Stalingrad. On paper, Hitler's Directive No. 45 looked brilliant, yet in reality, it broke the logic of his own offensive. Instead of concentrating force, Hitler divided it into 2 immense objectives hundreds of miles apart, turning Rostov into a logistical bottleneck that had to feed supplies and reinforcements for 2 offensives at once. The farther German forces advanced, the thinner their supply lines were stretched. Roads deteriorated under panzer tank tracks. Rail gauges had to be converted just as trucks began to break down. Fuel shortages worsened just as Soviet resistance began to stiffen. Hitler's decision would turn the triumph at Rostov into a strategic gamble that eventually ended in disaster at Stalingrad and in the snows of a Caucasus retreat that would ultimately end Hitler's ambitions on the Eastern Front. Hitler drew the wrong conclusion during his quick victory at Rostov. when he mistook the Red Army's decision to trade space for time as an army on the verge of collapse. While the 1942 Battle of Rostov is often overshadowed by the titanic struggle at Stalingrad that followed, Rostov proved to be a critical turning point in the German Southern Campaign, marking a high tide in German operational mobility in the East, yet it failed to deliver the decisive destruction of the Red Army that it ultimately needed. From Rostov, the Wehrmacht stormed into the Caucasus and into the foothills of the Great Mountains themselves, yet they failed to secure the oil they needed in any meaningful way before the other branch of Hitler's now divided army encountered catastrophe at Stalingrad, when the Soviets' winter offensive encircled the German Sixth Army and forced them into retreat, leading the Red Army to retake Rostov for good in 1943. In the end, Rostov demonstrated both the brilliance and limits of the Wehrmacht, which could still strike hard, maneuver fast, and seize important objectives, yet it could no longer destroy Soviet power outright, which instead survived, adapted, and prepared its revenge through attritional dominance in both manpower and rising industrial might, making the Battle of Rostov a rare moment when German success and failure marched side by side.